Afternoons. When I feel that I am too rushed and hurried to spare a few minutes to think about spiritual things, I say to myself, wait a minute, Dale Carnegie, wait a minute. Why all the feverish hurry and rush, little man? You need to pause and acquire a little perspective. At such times, I frequently drop into the first church that I find open. Although I am a Protestant, I frequently, on weekday afternoons, drop into St. Patrick's Cathedral on Fifth Avenue, and remind myself that I'll be dead in another 30 years, but that the great spiritual truths that all churches teach are eternal. I close my eyes and pray. I find that doing this calms my nerves, rests my body, clarifies my perspective, and helps me revalue my values. May I recommend this practice to you?
During the past 6 years that I have been writing this book, I have collected hundreds of examples and concrete cases of how men and women conquered fear and worry by prayer. I have in my filing cabinet folders bulging with case histories. Let's take as a typical example the story of a discouraged and disheartened book salesman, John R. Anthony. Mr. Anthony is now an attorney in Houston, Texas, with offices in the humble building. Here is his story as he told it to me. 22 years ago, I closed my private law office to become state representative of an American law book company. My specialty was selling a set of law books to lawyers, a set of books that were almost indispensable. I was ably and thoroughly trained for the job. I knew all the direct sales talks and the convincing answers to all possible objections. Before calling on a prospect, I familiarized myself with his rating as an attorney, the nature of his practice, his politics, and hobbies. During my interview, I used that information with ample skill. Yet, something was wrong. I just couldn't get orders.
I grew discouraged. As the days and weeks passed, I doubled and redoubled my efforts, but was still unable to close enough sales to pay my expenses. A sense of fear and dread grew within me. I became afraid to call on people. Before I could enter a prospect's office, that feeling of dread flared up so strong that I would pace up and down the hallway outside the door or go out of the building and circle the block. Then, after losing much valuable time and feigning enough courage by sheer willpower to crash the office door, I feebly turned the doorknob with trembling hand, half hoping my prospect would not be in.
My sales manager threatened to stop my advances if I didn't send in more orders. My wife at home pleaded with me for money to pay the grocery bill for herself and our 3 children. Worry seized me. Day by day I grew more desperate. I didn't know what to do. As I have already said, I had closed my private law office at home and given up my clients. Now I was broke. I didn't have the money to pay even my hotel bill. Neither did I have the money to buy a ticket back home, nor did I have the courage to return home a beaten man, even if I had had the ticket. Finally, at the miserable end of another bad day, I trudged back to my hotel room for the last time, I thought. So far as I was concerned, I was thoroughly beaten.
Heartbroken, depressed, I didn't know which way to turn. I hardly cared whether I lived or died. I was sorry I had ever been born. I had nothing but a glass of hot milk that night for dinner. Even that was more than I could afford. I understood that night why desperate men raise a hotel window and jump. I might have done it myself if I had had the courage. I began wondering what was the purpose of life. I didn't know. I couldn't figure it out. Since there was no one else to turn to, I turned to God. I began to pray. I implored the Almighty to give me light and understanding and guidance through the dark, dense wilderness of despair that had closed in about me. I asked God to help me get orders for my books and to give me money to feed my wife and children. After that prayer, I opened my eyes and saw a Gideon Bible that lay on the dresser in that lonely hotel room. I opened it and read those beautiful, immortal promises of Jesus that must have inspired countless generations of lonely, worried, and beaten men throughout the ages, a talk that Jesus gave to his disciples about how to keep from worrying.
Take no thought for your life, what ye shall eat, or what ye shall drink, not yet for your body, what ye shall put on. Is not the life more than meat, and the body than raiment? Behold the fowls of the air, for they sow not, neither do they reap, nor gather into barns. Yet your heavenly Father feedeth them. Are ye not much better than they? But seek ye first the kingdom of God, and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. As I prayed and as I read those words, a miracle happened, my nervous tension fell away. My anxieties, fears, and worries were transformed into heartwarming courage and hope and triumphant faith. I was happy, even though I didn't have enough money to pay my hotel bill. I went to bed and slept soundly, free from care as I had not done for many years.
Next morning, I could hardly hold myself back until the offices of my prospects were open. I approached the office door of my first prospect that beautiful, cold, rainy day with a bold and positive stride. I turned the doorknob with a firm and steady grip. As I entered, I made a beeline for my man, energetically, chin up, and with appropriate dignity, all smiles, and saying, "Good morning, Mr. Smith. I'm John R. Anthony of the All-American Law Book Company." "Oh, yes, yes," he replied, smiling, too, as he rose from his chair with outstretched hand. "I'm glad to see you. Have a seat." I made more sales that day than I had made in weeks. That evening I proudly returned to my hotel like a conquering hero. I felt like a new man. And I was a new man, because I had a new and victorious mental attitude. No dinner of hot milk that night. No, sir. I had a steak with all the fixins. From that day on, my sales zoomed.
I was born anew that desperate night 21 years ago in a little hotel in Amarillo, Texas. My outward situation the next day was the same as it had been through my weeks of failure, but a tremendous thing had happened inside me. I had suddenly become aware of my relationship with God. A mere man alone can easily be defeated, but a man alive with the power of God within him is invincible. I know. I saw it work in my own life. Ask, and it shall be given you, seek, and ye shall find, knock, and it shall be opened unto you. When Mrs. L. G. Bayard, of 1421 8th Street, Highland, Illinois, was faced with stark tragedy, she discovered that she could find peace and tranquility by kneeling down and saying, "Zero Lord, thy will, not mine, be done."
One evening our telephone rang, she writes in a letter that I have before me now. It rang 14 times before I had the courage to pick up the receiver. I knew it must be the hospital, and I was terrified. I feared that our little boy was dying. He had meningitis. He had already been given penicillin, but it made his temperature fluctuate, and the doctor feared that the disease had traveled to his brain and might cause the development of a brain tumor and death. The phone call was just what I feared. The hospital was calling, the doctor wanted us to come immediately. Maybe you can picture the anguish my husband and I went through, sitting in the waiting room. Everyone else had his baby, but we sat there with empty arms, wondering if we would ever hold our little fellow again. When we were finally called into the doctor's private office, the expression on his face filled our heart with terror. His words brought even more terror. He told us that there was only one chance in 4 that our baby would live. He said that if we knew another doctor, to please call him in on the case.
On the way home my husband broke down and, doubling up his fist, hit the steering wheel, saying, "Berts, I can't give that little guy up." Have you ever seen a man cry? It isn't a pleasant experience. We stopped the car and, after talking things over, decided to stop in church and pray that if it was God's will to take our baby, we would resign our will to His. I sank in the pew and said with tears rolling down my cheeks, "Not my will but thine be done." The moment I uttered those words, I felt better. A sense of peace that I hadn't felt for a long time came over me. All the way home, I kept repeating, "O God, thy will, not mine, be done." I slept soundly that night for the first time in a week. The doctor called a few days later and said that Bobby had passed the crisis. I thank God for the strong and healthy 4-year-old boy we have today. I know men who regard religion as something for women and children and preachers. They pride themselves on being he-men who can fight their battles alone.
How surprised they might be to learn that some of the most famous he-men in the world pray every day. For example, He-Man Jack Dempsey told me that he never goes to bed without saying his prayers. He told me that he never eats a meal without first thanking God for it. He told me that he prayed every day when he was training for a bout, and that when he was fighting, he always prayed just before the bell sounded for each round. Praying, he said, helped me fight with courage and confidence. He-Man Connie Mack told me that he couldn't go to sleep without saying his prayers. He-Man Eddie Rickenbacker told me that he believed his life had been saved by prayer. He prays every day. He-Man Edward R. Statintinius, former high official of General Motors and United States Steel, and former Secretary of State, told me that he prayed for wisdom and guidance every morning and night.
He-Man J. Pierpont Morgan, the greatest financier of his age, often went alone to Trinity Church, at the head of Wall Street, on Saturday afternoons and knelt in prayer. When He-Man Eisenhower flew to England to take supreme command of the British and American forces, he took only one book on the plane with him, the Bible. He-Man General Mark Clark told me that he read his Bible every day during the war and knelt down in prayer. So did Chiang Kai-shek and General Montgomery Monty of El Alamein. So did Lord Nelson at Trafalgar. So did General Washington, Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson, and scores of other great military leaders. These he-men discovered the truth of William James's statement, "We and God have business with each other, and in opening ourselves to his influence, our deepest destiny is fulfilled."